Camilla Cole, CEO, and CEO and founder, Will Jennings, Managing Director of Hypha Studios, arts charity.
Yeah, so I started this in lockdown, and it was a time where landlords really thought it was the end of the world, and if it wasn't for that, I doubt we would have been able to get spaces for free. So we started off in a unit in Eastbourne, and we did a call out, and we got like 20 applications in 4 days to use this space for free. And the trade was, you use the space for free in return for something for the local community. And we got the town director to judge it. So it was all local people, for local people, and it had to be local because that was the legal requirement at the time of walking in your local neighbourhood. That has really informed the whole of Hypha's model, which is fantastic in many ways. That's a tiny silver lining to COVID. And since then, we've adapted that and a much wider policy, much wider strategy across the entire UK, Scotland, Wales. We haven't gone to Ireland yet, but we want to. The model would work across the world as well, like America and Australia and beyond. But in essence, what we do is that we take over the spaces and we say to landlords or councils or anybody that owns the property, what do you need? Because we are a win-win-win for everybody. And we need to cater it, because otherwise our pitch is really scattergun. You know, some landlords just want to save money. Some landlords want to create a community. Some landlords know that artists bring the prices up, and we're honest about that. And we know that artists do a great favour, but they're also getting a huge opportunity. And so that's the trade. We turn things like this, which costs a landlord a huge amount of money to be empty on a yearly basis, in terms of social value as well as financial value, into really amazing, cool spaces where people travel to East Village and Stratford just to be seen there and hang out with new people. And we can pull an audience wherever we go, like whether it's a huge Asda in Wrexham, or if it's an industrial estate in the middle of nowhere, or a tiny arcade in Penrith. The model's entirely scalable, and we'll go into the huge office thing later. But Will, do you want to do a little bit of an introduction?
Yeah, I mean, so the good thing about this is, the reason we put this in, some of you might have been to it, this is the one that was mentioned in the introduction by Lucy. A former Sainsbury's, you see, not only is it empty space that's kind of sitting there and redundant, and the costs implication of that. And also when we entered this Sainsbury's, former Sainsbury's, all of the fridges and things were still left on and the lights were on. It was just crazy. It'd been like that for ages. So there's, just lack of thought often is given to like what happens when something closes or moves in this instance. And also street front looks terrible with all the vinyl and, great. So, this is one of the largest spaces we had. And I think for the year and a half, we've got some data on this later. For the year and a half we had this unit, it was probably, in my view, the biggest sort of non-institutional gallery in London. I think it was bigger than Gagosian.
It's 8,000 square feet, for reference.
We split it into two galleries, one wall down the middle, and just said, look, here's a big space. And then people that applied, we just chose kind of shows that people that could really handle that space, not miniature works. So some of the sculptures were really, really big projects. I don't need to talk to everyone in this room too much about the cliche of the high street crisis. Vacant units, all of the empty shop fronts we see, just like the Sainsbury's there, the idea of dark streets, low property values, just the sort of the secondary implication of that. Artist displacement is a secondary problem that's going on. That's something we're very attuned to. We both come from sort of cultural backgrounds, but even if you're not in the cultural sector, you are aware that, yes, it's great. We've got things like Tate Modern. It's great. We've got the big blue chip commercial galleries, but for the bottom of the ecosystem of that pyramid, it's not easy going. And that doesn't just mean artists who are like 20 years old graduating from Goldsmiths. That might also be elder artists who are returning to work from caregiving, or people who have changed their working employment and they want to like revisit that art they've done. It's an incredibly difficult thing to get into kind of from whatever angle you're doing. And is often rooted in who you know or the language you speak or a particular kind of secret code, which doesn't always lead to the best kind of ecosystem or cultural production. And then, as we've said here, which is something we think we're quite good at, this disconnect, that the language is often a bit different between these different disciplines. If I say the word art to people who are in property or local authorities or in the cultural sector, immediately a different kind of image will come to their mind. So even just kind of navigating and helping translate for different parties, like from our place in the middle, that kinds of understands the ways in which it is interpreted or understood. Not going to go into all of this academic papers. This is just one recent paper by A different Will Jennings, a very, very good one, who actually teaches at the University of Southampton. I've only met him once at a conference, and I got there a bit late, and I was very worried they were going to put me on stage, panicked, but they didn't. He's really nice, but he does do a lot of research into like towns and cities, and less into culture, but this recent one talks about high streets, and I don't know if you can read it, but I'll read it. Figure 15 here, has your area got better or worse over the past 10 years across a range of dimensions? The highest number with 46%, or it's got 46% worse on average across a very good data across the UK, is the condition of your local high street. And then the most important for improving your local area, the third highest would be improving the condition of your local high street. So this is something which is kind of in the conversation. You've seen it in newspapers, you don't have to look far on a Google search to find headlines like this. Some of them scaremongery, some of them tabloidy, some of them folding in various political issues. But, this imagery, this repeated conversation, you're all very familiar with. I think that's going on to you.
That's me, yeah. So the win, as we put it. It always starts with the landlords, ultimately. They have to have enough vision and they have to be progressive, and it's about timing, ultimately. We can have chats for 2 or 3 years, and then only then they'll say, actually, I've got a space for you. And they benefit in many ways. We'll go. If you click forward.
Of course.
So these are some of the reasons that landlords work with us. And it does, as I sort of touched upon earlier, it does vary spectacularly, and the model does totally change across every single building we work in. So it's not a specific formula. But, as you see here, there's some very basic things, like driving footfall is a very important one. When we take over a building, the call-outs that we do, they vary. There's a different creative solution for every empty space. If you're a retail unit, a gallery is perfect, and you do rotating shows, and every show that you do has 20 artists, they have 1,000 Instagram followers, you're going to get that many people's eyeballs on a space, you're going to get footfall traffic, the landlord loves it, it's a placemaking scheme for saving money. And then you've got active assets. A lot of our properties, sadly for us, but brilliant for the landlord, they get tenanted after we've been in there. And that's sort of why we're there, and we like to move around. We've worked in over 70 locations, and I used to work in a gallery in Mayfair, and it's hard in London to get the same audiences to come to the same space every day, and it just doesn't really work. It's quite archaic in its modelling. So actually popping up is really exciting, and our biggest crowds are when we first launch a space. And then they get tenanted, which is fabulous, or they get planning permission. We'll move on to that in a mere moment. Preventing decay, it's absolutely true. If a building is used, you'll know if there's a leak. You'll know if there's an issue with damp. It makes sure that the property is maintained and looked after. It actually saves you money in the long term. And of course, saving money on business rates is a big thing, of course, but we work in lots of listed properties that aren't rated. So that's not really the whole reason why people do it. It's about placemaking, and what we've found over the years, if we move on to the next slide, developers are our new major clients. So we used to sort of like run around and get these tiny units and be like, please, please, please give us a little space for a small amount of money. Now we're getting landlord developers come to us, and it's not our world, so we're still trying to break in there properly and understand our true monetary value. But we're getting these huge opportunities for like 20,000 square feet in Southwark, for example. We're being used for community infrastructure levies. We'll be in there for a year or 2 years, and that's really good for us because that's a semblance of sustainability, which is great, to a certain extent. We don't want somewhere permanent, but 2 years is good. And so, and in ESG, so, sort of the ESG requirements, they're real ESG requirements. Like, we are touching communities that you can't usually get your hands on, mainly because it's people that are from the local community using the space. So they're bringing in their friends and family. The culture in our units represents the culture on the street, and that's the thing that we like the most. We're not, as you always call it, helicoptering culture into an area. It doesn't work, ultimately. You could do it for maybe a couple of events, spend huge amounts of money on trying to get local communities in there, but it's not theirs. They don't have a sense of ownership. So we're here to facilitate their sense of ownership over their spaces. We are very much a tool, I think we see ourselves as, not a sort of dictator of what culture is, because it means something different to everybody. Over to you.
Yeah, I think just to say to that idea of helicoptering in is a problem a lot of times in both culture and also the way in which culture sort of intersects with the high street or property or kind of, sort of cities of culture and all these kinds of urban festivals and stuff. Because there is no one single culture And although Camilla, I and Viola are, there's only 3 of us, so it's a very small charity, the impact we've had goes way beyond the kind of the 3 people we are. But we do have a good cultural understanding. We do understand kind of what is rising in popularity or interest or the conversation in culture, but we are not the people that are curating every show, and that's really, really important. You know, we like to say we create the conditions, whether that's locality, whether it's the place itself, or the open call might have a theme or so on, or inviting guest curators in for shows. But we aren't the people that are there dictating kind of what the show should be. We do then, maybe it's worth talking just a little bit how the applications come to us. It's always free to apply. It's always based upon a matrix of quite a simple application form, but then quite a simple matrix of that we first look at of locality. We don't want people travelling from London to have a show in Penrith or Birmingham, because there are people in Penrith and Birmingham doing things, and they know the shops and they know the people that they will be inviting along. The quality of the work, like we've got to have a benchmark for that first, and that's not just about our taste. As you know, we often disagree on things, but then we
very different tastes.
Exactly, so that's quite important. And then obviously it goes to another level after that. Importantly, as Camilla said, the people we appoint to represent us in our spaces are not paid. They're not paying us, beg your pardon, but they are paying us in kind, if you like, through their public events, their activities, their engagement. So we do look at that quite well and hard in the initial open call, because it's all very well doing an application of a good show and saying, well, we'll have a private view and maybe an artist talk. But that's pretty standard for any exhibition. But then we get some really creative ideas of people that do workshops and events and plugging into wider activities, Gay History Month or local primary schools or what have you. So people do think about that, and that's really important to us, because our charitable objective is to give back to the community, and we are the people that know those communities. You know, we've got spaces in Edinburgh down to Chatham and Hastings. You know, we don't know those communities, the people there do. It's worth talking about those communities and the things that they do. You know, going from the top, we think high quality art exhibitions can be for everyone. You know, and even I and Camilla, who have both been in the sort of the cultural sector for 20 odd years or so, sometimes still feel nervous when you ring a bell on a gallery in Cork Street. You think, oh, is it open? Is there a show open? Am I allowed to go in here? What's this threshold? You have to go up these stairs, past some panelled walls, and culture cannot be that inviting. The first show we had, Molly Stredwick in Eastbourne, who we gave a former travel agents to. Joe Turner, the director of Townhall, was really pleased because he looked at the application forms as well. He went, there are people practising, doing really good work in Eastbourne that even I didn't know about. So firstly, it was great for him. But more importantly, for us, it was great for the town, because people walking up and down the high street had been walking past an empty shop, and then suddenly there was someone in there painting. And when COVID allowed, they would go in and go, oh, is this what you do every day as a painter? I've never met a painter before. Is this just what you do? And then what, do you sell them? And then she had a show, and she did. She sold all of her works to people in her local community. So those thresholds can really be improved, and I think by having artists in high streets and in unexpected spaces and thresholds that people are familiar with crossing, everybody is, it can really open up kind of new, interesting and exciting either word activations or encounters with culture. Inclusive, non-intimidating, street-level gallery access, the sort of spaces we're familiar with anyway. Free learning, these are the workshops and the events, and you know, they can be from the weird and the sort of very artistic, which not everyone would find, or they could be a kids' hand painting workshop, you know, and everything in between. New hubs to meet and collaborate. You know, the number of times we've put events on or opened up spaces and people met that didn't know each other but then did. We had space in Catford. We had one unit. We curated 3 local young black female artists to share this massive space. We said, look, you've all got individual practices. It's a bit big for one. Do you mind if we put you together? And they met each other, and they got on like a house on fire, and they didn't know. They all lived within like 5 minutes walk of this space. And we have other instances of collectives forming, of groups that didn't know they were in the same kind of neighbourhood, then doing things after. And importantly, people that have applied for spaces but weren't selected have got in touch with us and then got spaces further down the line, or just set up their own projects and collectives elsewhere. So there's kind of invisible networks we didn't know about. And importantly, focusing and supporting local talent, not that helicoptering in. Zero rent, so we don't charge, as I mentioned. It's really important. Not that we think artists are like special in any way, but it is very difficult in the current climate just to even find a space a desk to paint on or something. So to be giving space for exhibitions, to be giving space for some studios we have across the UK as well. Not forever, you know, but it can be a great kick and it can be a great kind of like leg up, not just in the space, but also in the confidence and the learning of what it goes into putting a show on. Recognition, you know, we work and we have recognition and we're recognised by various people in the cultural sector who sort of really admire what we're doing and are aware of us and come and see shows and kind of like it. So it's nice to be in that mix, even if you're just someone practicing by yourself or with a few people and you didn't know you could be part of this art world. The reach, high street windows provide massive visibility, but then so is the online. You know, obviously everything has to be a bit of analog and digital these days. Our digital network is growing 36,000 on Instagram, but also we're going to be launching newsletters and hopefully thinking about what can exist digitally beyond just social media. And then the room to create large-scale ambitious projects. That space we had in Stratford, I remember telling some of those artists we awarded the space to, like, enjoy this, fill the space, do things you've always wanted to do, because I doubt in your career, unless you get the Turbine Hall commission, you're going to get a space that's bigger than this. And some of them might. We might well have Turner Prize winners of the future, I think. And then just quickly on councils. As Camilla mentioned, we have various different models. There is no one single solution for a space, and there's no one single kind of culture for a place or a space, which means that you can't just say, oh, we do this kind of thing and we can drop it in here. It does take work. It does take kind of like feeling and learning the area and seeing what comes back, and some intuition and speaking to the people that apply and know the spaces. But it does mean that everything that is delivered is kind of bespoke and interesting and for that place rather than something you might see everywhere. And we don't just work on rates models, we don't just work with big developers, we do a lot with councils as well. A lot of councils have a lot of empty assets, and although sometimes they struggle to open them up because of various local government frameworks or because they can find it hard to get their head around thinking about their assets or the way in which they engage with culture in a different way. Many councils do have one or two people in those departments that do get it and can really flick those switches. And we've got, I think you can tell where they are, we've got Camden, we've done some really good things in Camden.
Yeah, we've been funded by Lewisham, Westminster. Camden's been particularly brilliant. We've taken on a former cinema we'll talk about that momentarily, but we're informing their development plans afterwards in the year in advance. So we've got 10 studios and a gallery space. They've also got a community space, and we collaborate on that. Our artists are telling them what the local community are saying, what they need. So, you know, the architects are then designing a space that's more fit for purpose than it would have been anyway, without heavy like research papers or stopping strangers in the streets. You've got active people wanting to get involved at the early grassroots level. And I think councils really struggle sometimes getting these spaces open because of the political aspect of it. But being a sort of third-party sort of charity, and that's why the charity status is so important, people trust us more than it would be a private company that says, we're here to sort of like work out what you want to monetize it. That's not what we're there for. And I think that's why councils are more and more working with us on these more interesting projects.
I think that's a really interesting point, just like a side thing there. Without spending lots and lots of money on research papers, we have encountered many people not doing what we do, but kind of interested in this intersection of culture and place or high street. And we know there's a lot of money floating around, and often, you know, whether that's with local authorities or councils or with private think tanks or private organisations, it doesn't always filter through. And we're not saying that we are the only people it should filter down to, but we're saying what we do on just 3 people and a skeleton kind of framework and not a huge amount of money at all, like not enough money, we'd like more, we deliver, you know, like 2,500 artists in 4 years. And we know people, organisations that have spent probably more than what we've spent in that time, and they might have delivered 3 or 4 think tank papers and, you know, like get-togethers where they've got lots of free charities to come in and give up their time for a day or two to tell them what they think. And actually those charities, if you just gave them the money and opened up some space, as councils are sort of learning,
gave it to local people,
they get the answers, they can see it in real time what's happening, and they can kind of build on that physically as well as kind of get the research delivered. So it can be frustrating sometimes. I think the next slide is a video. Yeah, so before I press play, just to give us a breather so we can have a glass of water as well. This is from the opening night at number 1 Poultry. Poultry, I'm sure everyone in this room probably knows, James Sterling, Michael Wilford, postmodern masterpiece, really important. Like, we love being there, not only because it's like an incredible building, as you know, but importantly because on the ground floor, the 3 shops have been closed since COVID time. One was a cafe, one was a clothes shop, Oasis, and one was like this weird sort of gym, not a gym, but like kind of a lunch break sort of exercise body place. There was no real plan by the owners for what they might do as commercial units, but they approached us out of the blue, I think, was it not?
No, sort of. It wasn't a landlord, it was a developing agent in between that sort of saw us as a way of helping with development plans.
Yeah. They were very generous. They put a small amount of money up front just to kind of clean the spaces, not do a lot of works, but like make it less like a shop, less like a cafe. But we don't want white wall, white cube galleries. We kind of like that patina, and artists do too. Because there is a sense of like you're going in the back room and that used to be the storage or the kitchen, or the floor changes and actually the lights are not quite gallery lights, but we work with that. And one of these spaces, the former clothes shop, has a row of what were changing rooms, and actually they make really beautiful like weird little viewing spaces. So you get the big room, you get the backstage, and then you get this like corridor of little booths, which, you know, is an accidental kind of happenstance of the architecture, but it creates really interesting cultural opportunity that no one could have planned before, and these curators play with and have fun with. They were sort of new to us. I'm aware of them from my sort of academic work in the past, but I'd never really worked with any. But increasingly they're approaching us, aren't they, and have been very supportive and understand as well some of the bits of the language we don't. They're kind of an important part of the jigsaw, so we'll probably come into that in the conversation about the future.
So, I mean, in particular, the bids are really, really great in the City of London. There's a lot of money here, and that's fantastic, and there's some fantastic empty spaces. And we've got this site, which we'll talk about now, and then we've got a few other exciting things coming up quite soon, also in the City of London. But as Will said, we were approached by, it's called Everything More, this group, Ben Cross, used to be General Projects. He saw what we did, he understood the value of what we delivered that wasn't just financial, and he managed to convince the Korean landlords that we were a good idea. I mean, how he did that, I have no idea, but it took quite a while to tell them to spend a little bit of money on this random little charity to activate these commercial units. But the reality was they weren't getting commercial occupants. That was not going to happen. So by spending a small amount of money on us, we brought together all of the councillors from the City of London and the culture team that loved it. We brought the bid together. Local partners are getting buzzy and excited about it. And that bringing public and private together is super valuable by itself. You know, often they're seen as the enemies of each other, and that's just not the case. And that's something that we love to do and bring people together. And I think, also what's great about this is that I don't know why there aren't more galleries in the City of London. The bankers are here, you know, they can buy some art. And so I don't know why there aren't more galleries. It's a crazy sensation, you know, and, you know, people love the mix. Artists do love bankers, bankers love artists. And it's like, there's a really cool sort of buzz in the air when you get these two worlds colliding, and then they can go to the Ned afterwards and have a good chat. So this is our three spaces that we've got in this building, as Will says. We don't have any, every show that we do, we collect a huge amount of data on, and landlords love this. It helps with development plans and Section 106 and all this stuff, and basically we can tell you what we're expecting to do here. On the next slide we'll tell you what we have done. But you'll see here that we're going to support X amount of artists. We're going to do however many events. We had 151 applications. We're giving out, awarded is spelled incorrectly, but that does not matter. It's 800K's worth of free space to artists in the local area. And like you said, the opening had 1,500 people come through the door. And having been empty for 4 or 5 years, that was fantastic. The Korean landlords came. They invited us to Korea, and we would love to go, but that was unrealistic. Maybe one day we can go to Korea. But, you know, the developers were nervous about this because they were very conservative in their art, and they thought that, oh no, you know, might have some breasts on the wall, that would be a problem. It was the opposite. The Korean guys absolutely loved what we did, and it was super exciting. So that's one Poultry. Not to mention the press we got on that. That was, you know, we were everywhere. We got Time Out, Architects Journal, Londonist, Fad, Estates Gazette, Ian Visits, Recess Space, Plaster.
I think it's worth mentioning because that talks about that intersection as well. The kind of this is a great example. I know it's a fairly iconic building and it is going to grab headlines. We've only had 3 sets of shows from 8. There's still another 15 exhibitions there over 1 year, and if it carries on, it might carry on. But for the most recent shows, you know, we've had architecture magazines like Architects Journal. We've had property and estates magazines like Estates Gazette. We've had local like Londonist, Time Out, and Plaster Art magazine. So it's actually not often you would get events which pick up kind of press in different arenas like that, and then all centering the same thing. And it's not about us; it's about what can happen in that sort of space. So it's quite nice to have that coming together. This is one we have done.
Yeah, so we won't spend too much time on it because I want to get to some Q&A, so I bet you have some fantastic questions for us. But this was the supermarket we were talking about earlier, and the landlord got us in there in order to get planning permission. That was what, and we don't mind that. That is okay. They're doing us a huge favour by letting have this space for free. So there is a quid pro quo. You've got to be realistic. And they managed to secure, I don't know, what, forget how many retail residential units they got and secured, but they're also having a community exhibition space as well. So there is a legacy of our impact that is going to continue into the future, and that's something that we want to start doing a lot more of, is informing these future plans sort of indefinitely into the future, getting leases for, say, maybe 10 or 20 years, maybe rehabilitating organisations that have failed because it's too expensive to have these spaces in central London, and then they start paying rent. So there's lots of different models you can do where you have no rent, a little bit of rent, profit share margins, and bringing together sort of mixed uses for everyone's benefit, whether that's councils or landlords. But yeah, next.
Yeah, I mean, but just to say on this space, I know it's one we did, but this is going back to that Sainsbury's, and just because it's nice to keep the same example. 300 artists, 100 events, 10,000 visitors, over a year and a half. I think it was really beautiful project. Am I doing? Yeah, I'll pick up the impact. Yeah, but we're young. We're not pretending we are the solution. I don't think anyone in the current climate, whether that's economic, high street, cultural, whatever, has the answer. But we would like to think we're an important part of a kind of a new solution which involves grassroots, community, thinking about things differently, opening up spaces, not just repeating the same things, in that cliche, if you do it another time, it's not going to work if you repeat the same thing. But in the 4 years that we have operated, and I remind you there are just 3 of us, 2 of us for most of that time, I think, 2,500 individual artists we've given space to either in exhibitions or studio space, 156, and this is probably, every time we do a presentation, these numbers are out of date, so I think it might be bit more. 156 exhibitions over 70 sites across the UK with 50,000 members of the public visiting and 1,000 events, totalling £5 million worth of space. And this isn't just London, this is Edinburgh, Wales, the South East, South West, Suffolk, everywhere. Oh, we have a map, including Dudley, Southport, Eastbourne, Horsham, Islington, Catford, Mayfair, Primrose Hill, Cardiff, Battersea, Derby, and many, many more. But it's really important to us that we aren't just London, In fact, that first example, Molly Stredwick, was an artist who studied at Camberwell College of Art. She'd finished her degree, then COVID came. She had to return back to her family home because there was no way for her to stay in London. She couldn't pay rent, she didn't have a job. Wanted to keep making, didn't have space in her family home. It was a small house. Started painting outside on a wallpaper trestle table. And then we gave her a space. And she started painting inside the travel agents. And then COVID sort of restrictions changed. She could open it up, had exhibitions, people started buying her work. And she hasn't come back to London. And for us, that's kind of a success. Not that we don't want people to come to London, but if someone can find their way of working in their community and their audience and their future collectors and showrooms where they want to be, which doesn't always have to be in London, that's really good. Because, we Sheffield, our space, is a very different kind of outreach artwork communities than what we have in London, and that's not to say one is better than the other, but it allows space for all of those to develop. And I guess it's also thinking about this idea of value, which it pops up a lot in lots of conversations I'm sure you guys all have in your various jobs and things. The idea of value is not just economic. Obviously economics is part of it, but value is all sorts of things. There's economic, retail support, talent retention, business incubation, urban renewal, all of these things. It's no one size fits all, but it's all part of the mulch that we try and feed into and talk about. And I'm sure this will come up in the Q&A, so maybe those of you with notepads, take notes of some of these kind of buzzwords. The social capital and social value is really important. Obviously, as a charity, that's our objective, to democratise art and culture, to combat isolation. I know sort of big things, people always say, can art and culture really cure social and individual health? No, but it can be a really important part of it, bringing people together and discovering and unexpected things. Civic pride, we saw those headlines earlier. You got to any local paper and there's all those headlines about, do you remember when the high street used to be, and what have you. And diversity, which is often a buzzword that's overused and maybe misused in a lot of ESG or kind of reporting. But, and a lot of charities that sort of say they're trying to actually be diverse, and then you sort of go to events and you go, well, how diverse are you? Ours are. You go to our events and bankers are in the same room as queer trans artists, as indigenous artists making all these projects, and they wouldn't normally have met. And I'm not saying there will be a conversation in there that solves and cures all of our ills, but you never know what will happen, and even just encountering can be a really interesting start. And cultural capital, creative research and development. This is Luca, who we gave a studio space to, and then he got picked up by the V&A, who gave him a studio for a year and a bit, and he's done really big projects across Europe. Skill sharing in those networks we talked about, and symbolic sort of capital. Do you want to pick up the future as we go towards the Q&A? Because we don't know the future. Or do you want me to?
We can talk about this. I mean, this is probably a topic of conversation, but then, because we are so grassroots and we can be so hyper flexible, we do sort of find out what's going on in towns before other people, in the sense that it's a free to apply process. So, people come to us, and we know how much culture there is in Swindon versus Derby, as an example. And that's a very easy thing for us to do, and it takes a matter of weeks because you just see it all come out the woodwork. But in terms of what personally I'd like to do is have policies changed. I think, there's a big room, there's a big scope for adapting our model to different areas of society. That could be health, sports, it could be agriculture, it could be all sorts of things. And I think we could really use this model and open it up, and I think have a huge burst of innovation, temporary innovation while, money starts to come in, and just sort of use these little gaps really, really effectively instead of having these blights on society. So I think policy change is fundamental. The business rates system is also completely screwed, by the way. That does need to be sorted out. But if it's not going to be completely re-overhauled now, there's ways that we should harness it to make it better in the short run. From yield to shared capital, we've already touched on that. Convincing people, and we don't have to do this anymore. People are understanding. If you want a big building full of residential stuff, no one's going to move there unless you've got something really cool in the bottom. We're in Euston because it's opposite Facebook. Facebook broke a lease on another building, and the landlords are like, oh my God, we can't have another coffee shop. Please come in. So, we're our tiny little solution, which makes us £400 a month, is actually solving quite a big problem for British land. And then we're talking about cultural department stores, which we'll talk about in a moment. Decentralised cultural infrastructure, super important. People on the ground know more about their local community than anyone else does. And integration into the planning cycle, like One Poultry, we're going to be informing what they do with the building afterwards. One of our future sites that we'll show you is deliberately for a community infrastructure levy, which will then inform the policy for the next 20 years on this building, which I'll talk about in a moment. But having these meanwhile spaces inform this longer term thinking, and bringing in the community to make some of those decisions in the first place, and having live data for maybe a whole year, not just a snapshot of just sort of symbolic, tokenistic data, but actual live data from people on the ground. Super, super special, and you could do great stuff with that.
I think that word community, again, like diversity, is often dropped in, and maybe it's not always the most useful word, but I mean, really it's communities, because even a space like Number One Poultry, there is no one community there. There are some residential people, but there's also the business people. There's tourists there that pass through, and I think the next example is a great example of probably the biggest high street that you could imagine, but also the biggest mix of communities. Which is, we did a case study a year or 2 years ago with RCKA Architects, with Russell Curtis there, about what would Oxford Street look like if it was kind of embedded with culture.
Go big or go home.
We all know Oxford Street. I don't need to tell you about the issues of Oxford Street and the saga there's been just to sort of maybe get some sort of pedestrianisation there. Will that solve it? I don't know. But the American street shops and all of these other kind of stuff that comes out of it. But ultimately, it's a place of these enormous shops, department stores and just enormous one-off shops. there might not be the future of commercial viability for those kinds of units anymore. You know, the days of Mr. Selfridge are kind of long past. But the architecture's there, like the pattern of recognition, the social capital is all kind of there. And we worked with our CKA. This is just one page of a really nice document they designed and put together with us. What would it be if you turned some of these shops into a string of pearls kind of cultural destinations? So, you know, the old HMV, which are now, I think, when we started this, it had closed, but now I think it might have reopened as an HMV, is dedicated to music and performance. The old Top Shop might be for fashion and live art or something. The old Debenhams is turned into galleries and then studios on the floors above. And it's a mix, you know, there's no single fit. You know, you could have food halls, you could have artist studios downstairs, you could have busking spaces or whatever. Not super, super expensive to actually implement for a 4 or 5 year project. Certainly less than they'd be spending on rates and security.
Or derating it.
And derating it. You know, the damage that's done to buildings to derate things and kind of just cover them up with vinyl is kind of disgusting. And you can imagine to feed into that idea of a 24-hour city, a 7-day-a-week economy, you know, after work, weekends, whatever, diversity, people popping in just for an hour on their lunch break, or families not knowing what to do and like, we can't take the kids back to M&M World, what's this building going here? You know, it could be really exciting, and it doesn't have to be Oxford Street. This was just like aiming big and going for like, what would it be there? Fenchurch Street, smaller.
So it's 7:20, we have 10 minutes, so I'm going to go super, super fast. But this is
That's 7 minutes in.
another fantastic unit we've got on the horizon that we're going to launch in about a week's time. Again, in the City of London. This is a beautiful space. We'll have it for a year. We're doing it in partnership with the BID, Eastern City BID. And we will, it'll be totally free for London's best creatives. And it's possibly the most gallery-like space we've ever had. You know, usually the Aston Martin showroom, when it spins, is the model that people get quite excited about. So I am interested to see what we get for this, because usually the art reflects the space. And so there's this Fenchurch Street. Next. This is our most exciting one to date. This is Southwark Bridge Road, and this is, bizarrely, this building was previously a building for businesses that went under because of crises. Then it went under during COVID. So we're there. It's been taken under new ownership, and they're going to get planning permission. They didn't know what to do, how to activate it, and we've been working with them to help them work out the best way to value for money to make the space usable. We're going to turn this, we've gone 2 open calls for this space. And what Will and I do when we look at these buildings is work out the right parameters. What culture? Is it art? Is it theatre? Is it music? Obviously music, if you're in a soundproof space, that would be very helpful, you know. But anyway, these would be 3 galleries, 1, 2, and 3. There's a project space here, and then next door, we're going to turn it into 10 or 12 free studios. Free studios in the heart of London doesn't exist. The Paul Thingy Foundation, Paul Smith Foundation has like 8 studios, but they're incredibly hard to come by, and we always do it based on collectives. Because there are only 3 of us, we don't have the capacity or administrational efforts to sort of manage every individual artist. And part of our policy is that if you give us any grief, you're out. So, you know, everybody has to be complicit, and everyone has to get on. And actually it works. It actually creates a network, and artists are stronger when they're part of a network. If you're working in isolation, it's very difficult to get career opportunities to, you know, so we hope that the model is beneficial for them as well as us. But the idea is that we'll have about, 20 artists taking over this space for a year. And they'll possibly do a show in one of these bigger spaces. And this will be launched in May.
Something we haven't touched on that does intersect with this is the front space, the old lobby, which is photographed here before we've sort of tidied up a bit, is sort of going to be a revolving canvas, if you like, for, we haven't got time to go into it now, we've launched Hypha Curates, which is kind of a sales platform where artists can apply to sell work. There are hundreds of works on there at the moment. And, you know, if you're an artist that gets picked up by a gallery, well done. But very, very, very few artists do. Many don't want to. It's not their way of working. But they still might want to sell things or have their work seen by people that want to buy. So we set up Hypha Curates. So artists can sell through us. They get 70%, with 30% directly then supporting the charity. We have an exciting opening exhibition coming up very soon. If you look on our website, we can send you info. But It's really important not just for the artist side, but for the public side. Like, to buy and own art shouldn't just be for those people that understand the game or want to collect for capital reasons. You know, if I go to museums and I buy reproduction artworks from British Museum or Tate, but I think, hang on, I've got a little bit of money, I do want to support the cultural ecosystem, I want something unique at home that isn't just a reproduction, I wouldn't know where to go, and I sort of work in the cultural sector, and if I've got like £1,000 or £700, I couldn't really go into a gallery in London, they'd sort of laugh at me, and I wouldn't know where to go. But actually, we've sold quite a few things already from people doing just that, and they might be the people that want to buy something for 2,000 or 5,000 in a few years' time, or understand art or gift something.
But crucially, really, like importantly, as we picked up on earlier, like artists that we find have never been shown before, then go on to get institutional shows at the Icon or the V&A. So what we hope is actually we're not just totally altruistic, but you might get a really good investment. So that's sort of the thing all the time.
Another tiny future site, our smallest one today coming up.
Again in the City of London. So this is a vitrine gallery, and we're very excited about this because there doesn't have to be anyone in it. You just put put on an artwork installation, and then every 6 months it rotates. And this is with Aviva, and the building hasn't been built, but it will be, and we will be in there from May again.
Yeah, it's an Eric Parry building next to Liverpool Street Station. Built into it is this kind of vitrine unit. They put it into planning. They said it's a nice idea. We don't really know what we do with it, how to manage it. We do, so they just came to us.
And the artist gets a fee, crucially, on this
they
one.
They get a fee, yeah. So that'll be a nice little space, and you know, it might just momentarily interrupt someone's day, or it could be something that changes something bigger. So just to wrap up, you know, it's about that conversation. Just as we gave you the examples of the Press for Poultry, you know, we get covered by a lot of people, including, you know, Front Row did a feature on us. Over Freeze Week, the Art Newspaper podcast, which is a huge deal in the art world, did like a 20-minute piece with us, which was fantastic. The Telegraph, New York Times have done a really nice piece on us as well. Not because we are the answer, but because lots of people are trying to find out what ingredients might form the future of culture, high street, and so on. We'll go into the Q&A, however much time we've got, and I'm sure it will carry on into over the bridge and into the more historical spaces. What does the high street of 2050 look like? You know, issues with development planning. You're all sitting there, I know you've got lots of things buzzing around in your head. Why artists, why not artists? We sort of touched on that. We don't think artists should be the only answer. Value, that idea of value, economic, social, and all the other forms of value, how can they come together? Working with artists, do's and don'ts, superficial versus authentic, the idea of helicopters coming in, or you know, people that don't necessarily get culture, declaring what culture is, and then no one quite engaging with it.
Questions?
Yeah, we can take. Oh, there's cans are going up. How do we manage the questions? Is it just a free for all, or do you want to?
You two are on a roll. I think
We do tag team it every day.
So, if you put it back to the slide with the questions, yeah, perhaps that's going to help focus people's minds around a few issues that you're particularly keen to.
But throw us curveballs, though. Like, you know.
And
even,
comments more than questions if you have.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So, first of all, thank you so much. That was a gallop through a lot of information.
It's like a steam train, isn't it?
Really, really good. You spoke a little bit about Hypha Curate. Can you just explain for me, in case I missed it, what I understand from the financial point of view, you know, free to the artist and everything else. Talk a little bit about your operating revenue, like how do you support yourselves? What do you charge the landlord or the councils or whatever?
Yeah.
Have you thought about different kinds of value capture mechanism for all this great effort? Like you are generating IP and all this. What are some models for value capture?
Yeah.
And I guess the third question is, what's the worst thing that can happen for you guys?
Oh God, where do I start? Let's start with, what was the first one? The first one was...
The first one is operating revenue.
Operating revenue. We get bits and pieces from everywhere. Getting grant money for a charity at the moment is so difficult. It's the Arts Council is really struggling to keep up with demand. There are more artists in need than ever before. We get money from lots of different places. We're lucky we work across the country, so we've got a fundraiser that looks at trusts in local areas. So that's one way of generating revenue. We do national grants and trusts as well that we seek that money for. The Rothschild Foundation have been our biggest supporters from the very beginning. They gave us a 40 grand grant in the first year, and that covered basically my salary for and yours to a certain extent for like a year and a half. They then reduced that by 50%, as they should, because we need to stand on our own 2 feet. And then they've given us some money recently for Hypha Curates as well. We would love to have a development person sitting on our crew, but you have to. That takes time to nurture relationships with people, and it's something that. There's lots of value in what we do, and you're absolutely right, we don't monetize it as well as we should do, and we desperately need that. But saying that, even though our annual turnover at the moment is like, it's nothing, it's like 150k a year, but it is growing every single year, really in a stable fashion, which I think is great. You know, if we were a limited company, we could get investment, that would have been fantastic. But I think in a way, growing slowly, probably I'm in denial, but growing slowly and surely is something that I think will mean that hopefully the charity will be around for a lot longer. We do get money from landlords. We save them money. We charge them for saving them money. So that, you know, so there is an irony in that, which is the Korean landlords had no idea how to compute that. That was an oddity to them. But that does work. But just to give you an idea, the reason why we work with so many sites at once is for exactly the reason is we get little bits from everywhere. We have 24 sites at the moment. They all bring us in a range of 50 quid a month to £1,000 a month, maybe £2,000 a month.
You say they bring you, like, these are landlords giving you like a little stipend or something?
A little stipend to manage the property. And it's basically, it's cheaper for them than getting like anti-squatter mechanisms in. It's way cheaper. Like we were working with a council, I will not name who it is, but they had 3 schools that were empty and they were spending like 8 grand a month on 24-hour security on each site. Like, it's a vast amount of council funds that are there just to look after these empty properties. And so why do that and not actually give it over to us to then let the communities, and we would have made like,
and importantly, the kinds of buildings that councils own are ones which are at the heart of communities, schools, community spaces and stuff. So, and if the councils aren't going to use them, they are perfect for other community uses.
What's the worst thing that can happen?
Oh yeah, then we'll come to other questions. Yeah.
Worst thing that could happen for us? There's loads of existential questions that we're trying to not think about all the time, but having to mitigate risks about. One, difficult artists. Artists are incredible creatures, and I think anyone that's worked with artists, Sarah, you'll know very well. You'll have your times with them, but I think as times have gone on, you work out how to handle stuff. And actually ChatGPT is very good for making language a lot more nice. And so, it really is the best thing.
Calming down your tone.
Yeah, like, I'll be like, no, and then it comes across very nicely. So that is, ChatGPT, I'm very grateful for that. So that sort of eradicated that issue. And also, our spaces with the shows, they're short term. So even if they're a right pain in the bum, 6 weeks, ciao, move on to someone else. But we're talking about 5 people maybe in 2,000 artists. So.
Yeah, and actually, we do joke about this. We talked about this the other week, didn't we? That we went to an event about cultural charities, and there was one particular well-known big charity there that has had some big existential issues happen to them recently. And the chair of their trustees was talking about that situation. And at the end of it, we looked at it, we're like, you know what? 5 difficult artists in 4 years.
Really not that bad.
Really that much of a problem. So, it can be stressful, obviously, because we're not paid very much at all. We are generally working all the time because we care what we do. And it is a charity, and it is frustrating when we see other players or agents, not necessarily rivals, but delivering or doing things for the cultural sector which aren't as beneficial. There are lots of studio companies that charge a fair amount of money and don't always give good conditions for their artists or the creatives, and other people in the property world, as you all have met, I'm sure, in your day lives, not always as ethical or open-minded as you'd hope. But actually, the problems we've had are very small, and that slowly thing you talk about, I think, is really important, because now we don't have to chase people, they're coming to us and they're seeing the value and they're seeing the impact. Artists are trusting us, and you hang around for 4 years, people start to know who you are and go, okay, they are okay. And that's testament, I think, well, to the idea you had, but also just the impact that he's had, real impact.
PR crises, you can get accused of all sorts of things being a charity. Whether it's racism, transphobia, I think as long as you're not, you're fine.
Try not to be.
Yeah, exactly. A fire, building burning down. again, it's unlikely to be us. We've got solid checks with every building that we have. Also, the insurance, we're insured on 4 different, contents, public liability, everyone's got everything. It's like we are as safe as houses, as some people say. And those are sort of the business rate system changing. Actually, at this point, we're being used by developers for such big things that I actually don't think that would really touch the sides at the moment. Because I think we just have to start seeing ourselves as a placemaking strategy instead of this sort of quick, sort of flexible use. And actually, I would like the rate system to be changed, and I don't think we should really exist, actually. I think if it was working properly, we wouldn't be here. Anyone else?
You've had your hand up a long time, I say yes.
I have a kind of a question and a comment, I suppose. I liked your spelling mistake, by the way. You said awarded, and I think awarded is exactly what the landlords are doing with their properties. So
You're an artist, aren't you?
maybe an accidental good word. You measured the value of the rents, as it were, that have been given to you. Do you measure the value of the sales against those
artwork?
rents? Yeah.
So this actually feeds into your question as well about valuing, working out the value of things. And I might lose my track because I've got baby brain at the moment. But the sales stuff we only started about 3 months ago. So we don't have, we sold like 12 grand worth of stuff in one exhibition, which was fantastic. 70% of that goes to the artist, the rest of it goes into operating. The value of the space it's a really easy metric to calculate. But in the property world, they've got this thing called TOMS. Does everyone know what TOMS is? TOMS is it doesn't work for us. It's like square peg, round hole. It's like how many hours do you spend on each event? Do you have any previous convicts working in your property? This sort of stuff, which just doesn't apply. And so we've tried to work with Social Value Portal. We've tried to work with all these different places to try and turn our metrics into useful things. Actually, what we end up doing is saying to the landlords, what's the data you want us to capture? Because part of the deal is that the artists have to give us back the data that we ask them for at the end. And then we can turn it into a really interesting package. And then we know what the cutting edge data is that the landlords want, because they're the ones requesting it, obviously for a reason. And we can keep using that. So that we try to do all this valuation stuff. And in an ideal world, we'd pay someone to sit there and do it properly for us. But we've got...
Just to come to the question about the value of property we've given away, that's the rental value of the space we've given away, not how much money we've made or anything.
Yeah, no, I understand that. The reason I asked for the value of your sales is because it might actually help establish what the true value to an artist is. So rent is kind of the maximum that the market will pay, which includes everybody. And it's very questionable if that is the value if you can't let the property, but that's another issue. But even if you think in terms of turnover rent, actually having an understanding of how many sales are generated enables you to see, well, what is affordable to the average artist in different areas. So you could actually start setting the market for artist space by understanding.
Yeah, but this is important actually, I think, because not all artists want to sell. Sometimes the best art isn't sellable. Often, as we know, some of the greatest artists in the world not till after they've died. Which we hope doesn't hit the case for all artists. But also, we haven't, all of the exhibitions we've done, the 155 of those exhibitions have not been us selling work. It's only Hypha Curates that we've sold work on that one show and what will go forward. Artists might have sold work themselves off the back of it, that's great. And we have always said, if you do sell something, we would love you to consider a donation to us because we're a charity. We haven't always all followed up on that. If they want to sell work, that's kind of their business. And it's great for them too. But it's important we don't just put in shows we think are going to sell. We're not Clarendon Fine Art.
I'm not suggesting you do. I'm just saying the data you have actually does have value in the commercial world, because it kind of establishes what, if you didn't exist, they'd
Absolutely.
be able to
The one thing we have to be careful about though is that, the moment that we start becoming a retail space, that's why Hypha Curates is an online platform, because suddenly that would jeopardise our charitable status and charitable use of that space. So it's generally an online platform, which again, it's free to enter and people can submit their artworks and that they become part of a show. And occasionally we dip into a space, and that's so it's hard to have a metric on that because we can't have continual selling exhibitions, because then we would become a commercial gallery. What's the difference?
And you left the commercial gallery world
because
to
it
work
was
in the
broken.
cultural charity.
Because it was broken, aside from the blue chip guys.
Can I also just quickly sort of say that the other element of value which really interested me, and I see this coming up again and again with heritage space in particular, is the value of a kind of temporary use. And you see more and more that the planning mechanism, which is very top-down and prescriptive and based on late 20th century use classes, not what's actually happening on the ground, means that it's very difficult to get things that don't fit into those boxes off the ground. So you're kind of making, albeit in the art world, and I think the the question, is this only for artists, is really pertinent. But you're actually establishing a case for what you might call, rather than retail use, active frontage use or something like
Experience,
that.
I think, is it?
You're demonstrating that there's a new use class out there. It's potentially really quite revolutionary. It's really genuinely bottom-up planning rather than top-down prescriptive, predict and provide planning.
I think that's right, and I think the thing that we're encountering quite a lot is that, we move fast and planning and development happens slowly. And that can be good and bad, actually. Like, it's quite good to have the stability of planning in many ways. The City of London, they now have a cultural policy. I think people are aware of this. In order to build certain projects, you have to have a cultural strategy. Landsec has been very sort of active on this front. And that's why I think loads of bids are getting quite far with these empty properties in the City of London, because everyone's like, right, we need a cultural strategy. What do we do? Yikes. They're looking at having mixed use halfway up a building. There's some insane ideas happening in the City of London. It's more exciting here than anywhere across the UK. Major institutions and organisations are coming here. So I think it will be a hotbed of culture and creativity. And that's because of the planning, and that's, I think, extremely exciting. And hats off to the planning officers of the City of London, basically.
We have probably time for a couple more before we carry across the bridge, maybe. I've seen your hand and then at the front as well.
Oh,
First, yeah.
sorry, I thought it was
No, you go first.
Will and Camilla, thank you very much. That was a fabulous talk, and I think some of the projects are remarkable. The stuff you're doing with Ben across poultry, and I really liked the RCKA Oxford Street stuff you did with Russell, which is just a brilliant way of getting rid of the kind of American sweet shops. I don't know how they all exist. My question really, I'm sorry, there's a lot of questions you're getting about income streams. I'm terribly sorry.
It's okay.
But
We're looking for answers on all of that too, so yeah.
yeah,
It helps us.
it feels from what you're describing, and obviously I don't know the metrics, that it makes probably more sense in London in a way. And I want to know if that's true, because the place that really needs you is like Sunderland, say, to pluck a name out of the air. And is it more difficult to bring it to Sunderland?
It's really funny.
And is there a strategy to make it easier, like is there a franchise model you're looking at or something?
It's really funny you say
pushing
that.
out?
So actually, the London sites are wonderful, but they come and go because there are people with money and ideas. And there are places, but actually our best places are actually usually the ones that I'm always like, no, we can't fill that. That's like in the middle of nowhere. There's no one around. There's one of the sites we have in Swindon, it's a shame we don't have a picture of it, but it looks like Elon Musk's evil lair. It's this huge glass airport. It's enormous. And, I was just like, we can't fill this. But the beauty of that is that once we're in, we filled it, no one else is going to fill it. So we will be in there long term, and the creatives that are there will be there and will be embedded. And we found 2 incredible dance academies that have taken on Elon Musk's evil layer, and they will probably have it indefinitely now until they get planning permission or develop it. And it's the same with Chatham. We've got this insane, beautiful, bespoke building, and it's brand new. We've got 5 different groups in there: theatre group, artist group, VR group. I was like, Chatham? Is there culture in Chatham? There's loads of culture in Chatham. And it's a beautiful building, but it's too expensive. Why would you go and rent a building in Chatham when you can now rent a building in London extremely cheaply? So these artists are now sat there in this glorious building, and probably will be there for a long time.
Just to add to that, there other organisations across the UK do similar-ish things to what we do, generally in a local level. Not Sunderland, I don't know very well, but Middlesbrough, for example, has some good projects going on. Middlesbrough Art Week, which I go to every year, takes over empty shops and does all sorts of things. They don't always use quite the same model, but what often happens in places that do such meanwhile or activation, one person leaves because they get a job or family, or that building gets taken back by the landlord, and then the whole thing goes. Well, our resilience, I guess, is that the name Camilla gave it, Hypha, as a network that pops up, mycelium network that doesn't have a central base, but it can grow up and pop up in different places and then grow up somewhere else. We're creating the conditions. We're not helicoptering in, we're not telling people what culture is, but we could be in Sunderland. We've been in Wallsend, in the edge of Newcastle. Yeah. We had like a year there and then we disappeared. But like those projects have happened somewhere else. And so it is quite important that we offer like a framework that can happen in other places. And sometimes local people might use that, it might move somewhere else.
To your point, one of the things we did want to do, when we've got the money obviously, is have pods in different areas of the country. So you'd have Hypha Scotland, you'd have Hypha Midlands, you'd have Hypha Wales, and you'd have like maybe 2 people or 3 people, one artist management, you always have to have someone to manage the artist. And then you'd have someone like a fundraising person because they'd know all the grants on the ground and they could connect all of those. And then you'd have a landlord person. You need 3 people per unit.
At the moment, we're doing it nationally.
Yeah, at the moment, and we are growing, but that we're growing fine. But that is what we do want to do eventually, and that would be better in many ways. And then you could start to do residency swaps. So you could have London artists going to Sheffield, Sheffield artists coming to London, and you could have like cultural transfer of knowledge, which is super exciting and hopefully something we can do in the future. Which,
like I would say, the Arts Council's national organisation isn't always that great at understanding differences between regions and allowing the money to distribute.
Do you have Arts Council funding?
No.
Sorry.
It's a sore point.
Sorry.
The Arts Council love to fund the people we give space to, but they don't like funding us. And I get it, but we do need to eat. And actually, what's good about that is that it has made us more resilient. In fact, we don't bother applying to the Arts Council now, even though on paper it's perfect for it, because we're not social workers. We do want to give art to the people in need, that need it the most. We always try to make sure, and it's difficult, you can't, credit check people, but you can sort of identify who needs the opportunity. But we're not going to make like, if you haven't served this demographic by this date. And actually the administration of giving out this money is not really worth our time, to be honest with you. We'd much rather just be doing the work.
Final question, and then it's the drinks.
Okay, and the question about the City of London. I really enjoyed the recent exhibition on the ruins of the Bank of England. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting is obviously it offered a commentary on the buildings of the neighbourhood. So I wonder to what extent you encourage people to review or comment on the immediate neighbourhood of the galleries that they're using. And the other question, as a City of London resident, is I'm interested to know to what extent you think that you are or might be able to influence City of London cultural policy.
I'll take the second one, you take the first.
Perfect, I'll take the first one. I mean, you've picked a very interesting case over there. So if some of you haven't been to Peltry yet, there's 3 galleries in Peltry. One of them is particularly focused upon architecture and the built environment issues. We wanted to differentiate the 3 galleries a little bit. With another hat on, I run an art and architecture publication called Recess Space, so it made sense to kind of brand it under that. The recent show that Paul has been to was by Sam Jacob, and it was about the Bank of England and Joseph Gandy's drawing. So, I mean, you've picked an example there which was directly about one of the most famous buildings in the world, right opposite the building we're in. And usually our exhibitions, aren't about, sometimes they are, but they're not, don't have to be about the physicality of the built environment, and they're not usually opposite one of the most famous buildings in the world. But yes, we do ask them to consider the local area, which in that case is physical and immediate, but it could be a lot more too, so it doesn't have to be about the built environment, it can be about peoples and communities, and that doesn't have to be through the art, that can be through the events and the modes of engagement. So yeah, that is something it's on the matrix of really important that we look for, that they're from roughly the area, but they're also interested in the area. And the second point?
The second point, influencing the City of London, desperate to.
Okay.
So for since lockdown, there's been lots of iterations of Culture and Commerce Task Force, and then there was Destination City, and then there's, you're obviously familiar with this, but there's these different, and every time I'm like, just give me an introduction to a landlord. I'm fairly sure that I can make it work. And they approach us with a level of trepidation and awe. It's just really want to work with you, but you're a little bit terrifying. So I think we're getting closer to it. I had a meeting with the City of London who came to the opening, and they love it, they get it, and we're just trying to work out the best way to partner with them and how to really bring them in a meaningful way of partnership, not just in a symbolic way. But they are doing an amazing job. The City of London is doing a fantastic job, and you know, the sites that we've got in One Poultry are fantastic. But you know, the bids get it because they've got money and they just want to spend it, and that's what we need. And if we really had a big wish list, it would introduction to landlords. That's what we need, and the rest of it we can take care of. You know, we don't need the grant funding. We don't need the rest of it. We just need the properties, because we've got lots and lots of artists, and there's lots of empty properties. But getting the right landlord is the tough bit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.